Hi guys, this is Hannah from Hannahmariaplans and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be setting up my bullet journal for February 2020 with a delicate floral theme. You might have noticed the missing January video, and to be honest, I just didn't have the time, although I held out hope of getting something up until the last few days when I realised I needed to shift my focus. Last month, I based my bullet journal on Harry Potter, and although I loved painting this magical world, I felt behind all month, and I believe my productivity suffered as a result, which isn't really in the vibe of bullet journaling. So for February, I just wanted to go a bit more minimal. This month, I was heavily inspired by a beautiful account called @FeeBujo. She creates some stunning floral and leafy spreads in a really clean way, which I wanted to try and emulate. I'm just going to put it out there that I had decided on florals before I'd even realised what month it was going to be, so I guess I'm going along with the Valentine's crowds, which is totally okay. To be a little bit different and to reflect how wintry it still is in England, I decided to use some cool colours and eventually settled on a blue and gold colour scheme. Starting off with the cover, as we always do, it's funny, I had a feeling of deja vu and I couldn't work out why I felt like I had done florals fairly recently, even though I was sure that I hadn't. And I realised that exactly a year ago, in February 2019, I had also done a flower theme. I actually think it's kind of cool to be doing a different take on the same theme a year later, and to be able to compare it to what I was doing back then when I was still new to painting in my journal. Be sure to check out my Instagram page and prepare yourself for some throwback photos. Anyway, weird coincidences aside, for my cover page I wanted to have a variety of leaf types, with them coming in from the sides of the page scattered with these flowers and berries. For the flowers, I'm using my gouache set from Miya and just mixed up a range of blues from light to dark, focusing the main pigment in the centre. I then brought out my Coliro colours gold set for the shiny details on the berries. I'm also trying something completely new to me this month, dip pens. Although I've dabbled with a bit of brush lettering over the last year or so, it's not something I've ever practiced or become particularly good at. I did a little research and it seemed that using a dip pen with a flexible nib was a great way of getting some precision with calligraphy, and a bonus is that it works with the Coliro colours. I found that getting the consistency of the paint right was a little tricky, and I needed to add far more water than I expected in order for it to flow properly. Once I did get it working, I found it really useful for tracing the outlines of the berries themselves before filling them back in using a brush. In contrast, using just the ready-made up inks was far easier to practice with, and I made sure that my handwriting was passable and I had adequate control over the pen before unleashing it on my journal. As always, all of the supplies that I've used in this video will be linked in the description below. I'm keeping the leaves very simple and very minimalist in this setup, just using small black lines to just add tiny details on some of the leaves and some of the flowers themselves. The colours that I mixed up for this spread are a sort of desaturated, mid-tone, muted blue, and I really like the little splash of colour that it gives to the whole set. So as I keep outlining the leaves and the flowers and adding the small details, I'm using a flexible nib mounted on a straight pen holder. When I'm ready to do the title page, I'll switch the nib into an oblique pen holder, which holds the nib at a fixed angle for writing with more smoothly. I'm very new at how dip pens and everything work, so if you have any tips for me, please leave them down in the comments and I will definitely take anything you have to say on board. I thought about drawing the lines for my calendar without a ruler, but my perfectionism got the better of me. I like to use a vertical layout with 2 columns, one for work commitments and one for everything else. Maybe one of these days I'll just commit to a setup without using a ruler at all and start to work some of that perfectionism out of my system, which honestly can only be a good thing. I am really happy with how this cover page turned out. I wasn't sure what to expect when I started this theme, and it's the first time in a long time where I haven't done a more complex watercolour or gouache painting for my first page of the month. The rest of the setup follows exactly the same process: drawing out your design, filling in the colour gradient, gold and shiny details, and then the black line work. I actually think this theme would suit all types of mediums, and if you don't have watercolour or gouache or any other paint to hand, then I think actually it would work even better with pens and markers. Watch this space. I might try and do one of my weekly spreads using just some Tombow dual brush pens and like a golden gel pen for the gold details. Let's see. Moving on to the next spread, on the left hand side of the page I'm doing my habit tracker, and on the right I'm going to do my project spread. For the titles here, I wanted to try and make them the focus, with the words just surrounded by flowers and leaves. I thought it would look cool to have a delicate calligraphy style for the word February, in contrast with writing habit and project in more of a block style, and I like the way that combination looks. The bold versus the very cursive lettering, I just think they complement each other very well. This month I decided to stick with the same habits I always track, so I have yoga, reading, climbing, and going to the gym. I feel like now I'm able to pick and choose when I work a bit more. I'm definitely managing to be in more of a routine compared to shift work, and as a result I'm being much more productive with my trackers than in previous months. Now this is the 3rd month that I've included a project tracker, and this is the 3rd design. I got this idea after watching a video from Elizabeth Turner, Plant-Based Bride. It is based on a Kanban board, which is often used in the corporate world as a project management system. It originated in Japan but has now spread all over the world. My boyfriend actually uses them at work, but as a doctor this is just something I have never come across before now. The general idea is that it should be a super practical spread aimed at helping you to manage projects. For me, this will be projects for both my day job and art project, but for you it could be school or university work or things you're pursuing in your personal life. So, I will write the name of my project down on a bit of washi or a small post-it note, and I can move it into the different sections that I have listed. The categories I've chosen to use are plan, which will include the initial concept and drawing, paint, which is pretty self-explanatory, edit, which might be editing footage or making final adjustments to the essence of a painting, sound, which won't be needed for certain projects but will cover music and voiceovers, extras, which again might be skipped out or be anything from video thumbnails and descriptions to framing work. And once the project has been delivered, the washi tape will end up in the section named Done. I've left enough space for 5 projects on the go at once, which I think is plenty. Let's be honest, I managed 1 of my 3 projects last month, so anything more is just a bonus. Moving on to my to-do list for the month. This is also a relatively new layout for me, and for those who aren't familiar with it, you write your tasks in the columns on the right and the dates go along the top. Once you've started a task, you can put a dot in the correct date for that row, and once you've completed the task, you can draw a line from the dot all the way through the task. Very satisfying. I'm finding the staggered columns work really well for me when I actually remember to write the little like task that I actually have on the dotted line rather than on top of the dotted line, because when they're not staggered, I just end up crossing through a task I haven't done. And although I look more productive, it doesn't quite work like that. I use the column on the left for my general bits and pieces, and I use the column on the right for my art, Instagram and YouTube. Another problem I found last month on this spread was that the binding of my journal didn't quite match up across the page, which meant that the dots were slightly off. This was really annoying to my perfectionist brain because it meant that the lines that I drew were never completely on the line at some point, and it just looked messy. Over the page and onto the next spread, and I think this design was my favourite to paint out of the entire setup. I loved the way it flows across the page, and I definitely want to incorporate something similar into a weekly spread later in the month. As you can see, one of the problems with using the dip pen in the Archer and Olive notebook is that you do get some bleeding through from the ink. Most of the time it isn't noticeable, but you do get some spots that are more significant. This is actually the main reason why I won't be migrating into another Archer and Olive when I finish my journal at the end of this month. It's a shame because I love the look and feel of them, and the paper is so thick and luxurious. It's clearly top of the market for those who don't use paint in their journal, which I would say is by far the majority. The uncoated paper just can't handle anything really juicy. I plan on doing a flip through of this entire journal in combination with a review of the Archer and Olive notebook towards the end of the month. This small space on the right is to let me write down what I actually want to move into my next journal and what I've decided I can do without. I personally love the idea of setting up the crisp and clean pages of a new notebook, but I also find it such a drag, particularly when it feels like I set everything up so recently. As a result, I'm really going to try and minimise the spreads I'm moving over to make it quicker and to maximise the pages I can use for actually bullet journaling. As you might remember from previous setups, I use my Instagram page to schedule my post for the month. I find that without this, I tend to post less frequently and that I have to search back through my feed to figure out what I've already posted. This wastes a surprising amount of time, probably because I tend to post at around 6:30 AM UK time and I get really sidetracked by all of the pretty things. I've simplified this page as well and only track my current followers to give me an idea of the trends from month to month. Moving on to the final spread of this setup, which is my first weekly spread, I'm doing a grid style weekly, which is again inspired by Atfi Bujo in her classic style. I find the grid layout leaves plenty of space for daily tasks and events. I actually left the first 2 days behind, so they're back in January setup because it meant that I didn't have to set up an extra page. Sometimes, let's be honest, laziness wins out. For this one, I really didn't want to go too over the top. I had and still have about a million ideas on how I could do this weekly, but I reeled it back in and just did the leaves and flowers coming in at the top left corner. I love how the addition of the gold watercolour really makes things extra shiny, and it brings back a bit of sparkle for my last month in this journal. I definitely want to continue this into the next one. as you'll see in just a moment, my clean and neat ideas didn't quite go to plan, with ink smudging literally everywhere. I didn't even think about the pitfalls of using wet ink with a ruler and how that would lead to a smeary mess. I thought about making a feature of it and then decided that a bit of white gouache or a white gel pen would make everything pretty much good as new. Despite the initial heart-sink moment, I think it turned out alright. Without further ado, let's jump into the full flip through of my February setup. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I say this every time, and although there are times when I'm not over the moon, I think this more minimal style has really achieved what I needed it to this month. With the days getting longer, my drives to work getting lighter, and spring finally in sight, I'm looking forward to what the month is going to bring. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and thank you for joining me with creating these spreads. If you'd like to see more from my channel, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and for daily updates from my journal, you can find me at Hannahmariaplans on Instagram. I wish you all a wonderful February. Until next time, bye guys.